it's all pretty straightforward. One thing, when you're putting the action in and out, and make sure that the which is commonly at the treble brake, there's sometimes an action support screw, like on Yamahas. It's actually in contact with the frame, all right, just to help to stop the action bending. All right, doesn't need a lot of pressure, but it needs to be in contact. Prepare the damper levers, tail felts, springs, etc. So that's all the repair stuff. Install damper levers on the beam rail.
Do you have a trick for setting the dag screw on the back of the action rail?
That's what?
That dag screw that's struck on the frame, the treble that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Do you have a trick for?
I just back it off until there's clearance, and then just back it forward until it's in contact. All right. And then I use the damper pedal and see if I can detect if it's moving.
Oh yeah.
All right. And if it is, then maybe I get a little bit more, and hopefully it'll stop.
Yeah.
Some beams are just so lightly built they just continue to flex. It's a nightmare.
I did just do the key bedding trick with the screwdriver on the rail and go tap tap from the front.
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah.
But I've got a Yamaha recently, and when you took the action out, that screw from the factory was wound out so far that you literally bent the end.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so the action was bent, and if you had to change that screw, you would have just stuffed up the whole regulation. And I was like, I'm not touching that. Just
Yeah, that's right.
move
So that's a situation where you've just got to leave it alone, even though it's just
No,
wrong.
Yeah, the little rubber grommet on the end of the screw is probably purest, so
Yeah.
punch
It's
the
at the
leather
bottom
and
of the piano.
all the stuff.
Okay, so prepare the damper levers. All right. Now these haven't been particularly prepared, except that I've left the original springs. They happen to be quite strong.
It's a conservation effort, that one. Conservation effort.
Yeah. But I have put some new tail felt on because it was completely stuffed up, and I have non-original it by putting some grub screws in the tails.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Not because I think that's a good idea, but because we occasionally come across pianos with them. Right? So your damper levers they're all prepared, and we put them back on, checking that we've got nice spacing between all the flanges. As I say, it really helps to make sure that all the parts are well aligned at this stage. The grub screw adjusters here, right, when you start, if you're going to use them later to make them work, you actually need to have them so that there is a gap. There is a gap when you start, that the grub screw is actually pushing the felt off the lever. Right? Yeah, so that you've got movement available for the future. All right? You come across pianos where English Wellmars and things like that, or some German pianos where they've got them there, and you've got, oh, that's nice, I'll be able to use those later to get a nice fine adjustment. And then you find you can't adjust them anyway, because in fact they had started to and screwed so far out that there's no adjustment available. So a really good thing to do right at the start is to make sure that there is that gap there.
Before I put the tail felts on quite often, I just do it by feel. Because you can do that pretty quickly. You can run your hand down and go, these are, this one's not protruding as much as the others, and you quickly do that. And then put the tail felts on and
Okay, so typically, of course, the screwdriver is here. So when all those, and then you put all your damper levers back onto the mechanism, and you, at this stage, you can. Let's see.
Now it's a conversion to a straight stroke.
Is that that's a genuine pitch raise?
silent.
What you wanted to do before, if your piano has got those grub screws, is take use them to align the damper levers before you even start. Alright, so, alright, and align them here. So, and you need the action out of the piano facing you. On a bench like this.
That's a nice ringtone.
You've heard mine. It's not pretty.
Anyway, so make sure all your levers are on and nicely spaced, and all your heads are nicely spaced left and right. And for that, bending pliers, things like that. I've got a rogue damper in here with a different button. We'll just put them in the middle, and just do this by eye out of the piano so that they're nicely spaced, basically evening out what was originally there. Right. Now we're going to set some samples that we're going to use to include the rest of the dampers and bend all the wires before we put the heads on. So I would normally choose the first clip, the first single, last single, first bichord, and last bichord, which is masquerading in this model as note 66. This is actually a treble damper, but for the purposes of this article. And then we start thinking about what heads we're going to use, and how much damper we can get on here. Can we get a bigger damper in this case? In this case, it's a bit tricky. The top of our dampers, you can see, are at the maximum height available. We can't get a damper any higher than that, except we could, and sometimes this is very useful to do. We could take a damper like some of the English pianos, which are like this, all right? And here's our hammerhead going toward the string, all right? And we can get even a millimetre or two more damping closer to where the hammer strikes by cutting that damper on a wedge like that. And the way to figure out whether that is what you want to try and do or can do, or it's worth doing in a particular piano, if the piano leaks, is to see if you can improve the damper. And what I normally do is take a damper on a piano that is leaking badly, right? And I just want to touch with the old dampers in the piano. And it makes no difference in this case. I just touch this damper on the top of the existing damper, just a little bit of it, mimicking what I'm trying to do. And on some pianos, especially some English pianos and some bigger older German pianos, it makes a huge difference. All right, I'm trying to get that damping point much closer to the strike. So, in the case of a small damper, like this, we'll assume it's not going to make any difference. But we're going to try and get a bigger damper into the piano here. So in fact, we have to extend our damper longer. All right, down. Here's the button and the screw and the wire. And the tricky thing here is that the bottom end of the damper is now probably going to collide with this. All right. And the danger we run into is that the damper, when it lifts, when the damper lifts here, alright, the tail of this damper is going to bang on the wire next door in the base. So there are some limits to what we can do. So we're going to have to jiggle around with either the dimension between the we're going to have to we may have to change the bend in the wire.
Put a big hoop in there. Like
What's that?
You just put a big bend going the other way kind of style to get it out of the way.
Oh, I think that's horrible. It's really difficult to do. I have seen it done. All right, I have seen it done. So the wire comes down here, it goes out here, back here, and around like that.
I've done a couple of big players like that where they've tried to get in a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And or some of them they've tried, and they've done a big loop like that.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've seen one or two, but it was horrible. Horrible. Yeah. My advice don't. Yeah. Go
How
on.
acceptable is it, David, for quite a few of those longer damper heads come with felt backing, which can touch against the wire, but there's a limit to how much you touch because you'll be pulling that damper off if it's.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I'd like to see some. I'd like to see some clearance.
Yes.
But
Yes. Yeah.
so, or you can try and move the damper forward, right, by changing either the length of your damper block here. Sorry, the damper block is better drawn this way. All right. Changing this. Damper button or damper block. And the damper block, or in some instances you may want to make it thinner. So, for example, you can change that dimension by just even on a cut set of dampers or a pretty cut set of dampers, taking that off and putting a different one on. It's difficult sometimes to get the correct sort of flexibility in that felt. You need some movement, all right? It needs to wiggle around, but it needs to be firmly held. Yeah. All right. So I've done a couple of experiments, and actually with the hammer hardener that we've been using, B72 or whatever. All right. You can, if you think that the felt that you've got there is not stiff enough, and sometimes you're using something like cushion felt or something like that, it's really far too weak. Just dope it up for a day beforehand, and you'll find it works quite well. I thought, okay, you've changed the, all right.
Voicing your damper around.
Yeah. Those crystal things, little baggy crystals.
Anyway, when I was talking about trying to find funny dissonant overtones and things like that you're trying to damp out on some pianos, and you just can't get rid of them. Just be aware that there are a lot of modern pianos where the back lengths, behind the bass bridge, behind the treble bridge, the whole way, are unmuted. All right. I'm coming across increasing numbers of people who are frustrated, saying, "What's this dissonant, funny noise here?" All right. And it's just the factories economising. They're just putting no listing in. All right. So they're making a straight, cheap, bright sound. All right, and it's got all kinds of dissonance and noise in it as well. Some is coming from that. So just be aware if you're trying to. Sometimes some of these, what are perceived as damping issues, aren't damping issues at all. They're actually, you just need to take the time and aftermarket fit listing in brand new pianos.
But that's advantageous in so many different ways. Long term for you anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so now let's try. We'll just quickly restring my piano.
Nicely wound bass string.
Oh,
that's fine and
very
fine.
smooth. Yeah.
Actually, I've had a set of bass strings that were about that stiff that came out of Rotorua. you could actually just pick them up and point the other person far away from them. Like that I am from David. I could
Sell them to the fencing club.
yeah, absolutely rock solid.
At least they won't battle.
They actually sounded like somebody kicking over a barrel of water. Bonk.
Like those big old Brinsmeaders, Broadwood Brinsmead, they've got the belting goes all the way through the bass string and comes back again, they've wound it around the bass string.
Yeah. It's so weird.
So now we need to find. Now we're going to try, and you guys can choose. We'll have a crack at this. Are we going to mimic the original buttons here, or are we going to change them to like a European style round button? Doesn't matter. Who's it? Do you know the one thing I haven't got is a nice fine screwdriver for the buttons here.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll leave these ones here for today, just because just through time. But there's no prohibition in going from one to another.
No, and the one argument for the brass barrels would be that you get a little bit more mass. If you've got a damping issue.
Oh yeah. No, that's another issue. I was talking about round wooden buttons as opposed to these American ones.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like these. I'd go for the
round ones.
The European ones.
Yeah.
Just because you've got more ability to adjustments and things, you can.
It's just, I guess, what I'm used to.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry. Amazing. The moment you want one particular tool, it's not here.
What do you need?
I need
Kevin can't find
flat,
one either.
fine bladed screwdriver.
Oh, a flat one, yeah. As well.
Yeah,
It might not be small enough.
No, that's good. Right. So, actually, they will come off. Let's give this a crack.
I've got some propellered ones like that.
Friends can have a food shop and they just pick up the screwdriver. Big screwdriver.
Could you tell me screwdriver?
The issue that Graham was talking about there is the issue of mass of the damper heads, and that's really important. All right. I noticed on that video from Francois yesterday, on the Tequila one, that in the bottom of the base there, they had slots for springs. Yeah. Springs and dampers are a funny mixture.
What, springs in the damper?
No, on the damper mechanism.
Right.
All right. So on the damper lever in the grand piano, a spring.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, and lots of American pianos and American Steinways have them. Last octave in the bass, that kind of thing. All right. More damping, more spring pressure doesn't improve your damping. All right. More mass will. All right. All right. If a wall is vibrating because a truck's driving by next door, it makes no difference whether there's a spring against it or something like that. Or if you want to stop that vibration, you build a stronger, heavier wall. Okay, so that's what Graham was talking about. That sometimes, especially with really big uprights, and you've got just puts everything out of sequence a bit for here, but that's okay. You've done the whole job, and it's still not damping efficiently enough, particularly in the bass, the low frequencies. You need to add mass. So you can get these as brass, right, to add mass, and that will help. That once you've got enough tension on the damper springs, adding more doesn't help, and you come across heaps and heaps of little English uprights that play like complete trucks because there's so much. Somebody has said this doesn't damp very well. All right, stiffen up the damper springs, and all it does is make the piano feel horrible. Okay, so speaking of which, how much is the correct pressure on those springs? And the top end of an upright, it's not very much, probably about 15 mils pull, if you want to get fussy. Oh, here you go. Don't get fussy, a little spring scale here.
Ooh.
All right.
You go fishing, don't you?
Only for very small ones.
It's for sprat catching, you see.
Yes.
So and this one is 0 to 60 grams. Okay.
Yes.
So I would say damper 65 here. 10-15 grams spring push is enough. All right. Down the bottom here. At the top of the break in most uprights, 30 is maybe 35. You don't want too much more than that. All right. And down the bottom here, maybe you want 50, but that's really getting out there. And if you can back that off, so when you want to do a little bit of experimenting. If you've got everything done, and you've got something like this, or you've got all your buttons all set up ready to glue, right, and you go along and adjust.
Well, that's cool.
Right, so this is sitting at 55. Right, so it's probably too much. Right, if you take the time, if you're trying to do a really nice job with something like this and go through a set of damper springs, holy moly, you think that you've transformed a piano that feels so much smoother. I mean, that's a big point in an upright action where you meet the dampers. And if you make the damper lift even and the damper weight even and transitioning out, it makes such an improvement to the touch. If sometimes people, anyway. We're trying to find a damper that's going to work here. Let's have a look to see if we can get.
Your spring gauge, was it, do you get it in local engineer style, or is it a import?
Fishing shop.
That's an import. That's an import from
Switzerland. Off Wish.
Pizzola.
Oh,
Right. And they come in all kinds of different ranges. They're beautiful tools.
You get it in green.
Yeah.
Alibaba.
Yeah. All right. So we've let's see. We've decided we can use a. Decided we can use a.
Pistol over here. That must be the same.
This damper here. It's too long. So we're going to. Rather, the top is too close, and this one here. Move the position of that. Well, so the top of this new damper is the same height as the original, which was the maximum height that we had. Right. And and when this damper, and I'm just going to, for the purpose of the exercise, quickly glue that.
I noticed that you've made a bit of a move towards the tight bonds.
Yeah, I like it actually.
Yeah. Tight bonds, it's tight bonds original, do they make it in caramel as well?
So I'm going to get in trouble with this damper because it is
58 mil backing plate. And the bottom won't clear the string when you...
I need this full weight. I need this full thickness cushion here.
Yes.
But I need to take it off and move it up.
Oh.
All right. So for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to use this one because I can see, even though it looks too high relative to the hammer, all right, that when all my damper levers are in line here, all right, I'm going to have sufficient clearance here.
So without having to bend the wire, you've done that big loop in it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right. Now, what I want, and I'm looking to my wire because I put a different button on. My wire has gone.
We've done this a few times, but the wheels fall off. If the action's not big enough so that you've got a great enough distance between the centre pin and the damper drum, when you change the heads from 32mm to 58, the bottom of the head won't clear the string when the key's fully.
The which
down.
what?
When you've only got a short action,
Yep.
and you upgrade from 32 to 58mm monster brakes,
Yeah.
when you push the key right down, the bottom of the damper still won't come off the string.
Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
because the
Alright.
radius is smooth.
The radius.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Well, there are
So
some-
I think the model needs some keys.
there are all kinds of horrible things here. Now at this point here, all right, I'm just lifting this off in the piano and having a look to see that my damper button is contacting my felt block the whole way up and down. And the opposite, for good damping, unfortunately, the opposite of what you just described needs to happen. All right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The damper. The bottom of the damper comes off the string last because of
The radius.
because of the radius,
Mhm.
right? But it also goes back on first.
Yes.
All right, so the damper kind of contacts the string and then folds back onto it a little bit. So you want to set that up here. You know, if you come to a piano, I have some photos and you pull the action out and you look at the old string cuts on the dampers, especially the treble dampers. A real horrible watch point is to see that those treble damper felt blocks 50 years later or wherever it is,
Bottom's brand new.
they're all bottom loaded or top loaded. You know, they're just not operating efficiently. So this is the opportunity to get that damper operating completely efficiently.
Doesn't look like that end of work.
I don't know.
have to try some of
That
that.
needs a little bit more glue-up time, don't it? That belt would have sucked a bit of the...
Yeah, I don't actually want it to stick there
Oh, I see.
completely permanently at the moment, but it's okay. Normally, uh, and I'm obviously looking to see it's nicely aligned with that string, and I'm just dealing with this one here. There we go. All right, now this one is the wrong way around. All right, this is lifting, the damper is lifting off the top first. All right, so here come my bending tools. If you're doing damper work, I thoroughly recommend you modify a couple of these. You guys all okay? All right, they're just normal benders, all right, except I've ground down the tops. And I always use the two together. All right, so here's the wire, and they are ground down as if they are a disc. All right, so they are two discs that operate against each other, like this.
You lever against one kind of style, do you?
All right. Sorry. So what happens is, so this is putting no pressure on the wire anywhere else. All right. It's not pulling it or pushing it or cranking it down. All right. All I'm doing is bending the wire. So these are my horizontal benders, and they are completely accurate. So they work like this. They don't touch each other. All right. They sit on top of each other but don't touch each other. So I can put them on this damper head here, and I can ever so slightly, and I feel that I'm bending the wire. Right? Okay, so this damper head here, there's a bloody string in the way.
I'll just get rid of that.
So this damper head here, this damper button here, needs a bend just under the head. There it is there, just a little. I'm waiting for our blue up time. That's better, alright? It's just lifting off at the bottom first. That rotation you're talking about, you can crank the damper slightly the other way so it's almost touching the whole time on contact. But that's critical, alright? That little bend.
Sorry, David, I'm not clear why you want it to touch slightly at the bottom first. I like them even.
Top.
Or if
Or
you
top,
put it,
whatever.
Okay, why here?
Yeah.
In the base there's more string excursion, alright? Grand dampers work the same way, alright? The general rule seems to have been, alright, make the end of the damper that is toward the part of the string which has the greatest excursion
Right.
touch first. Right?
It looked like you did it the other way, David.
Oh, last, you mean? So it's got more room to move. But with the least excursion touches first. Because at the top it's less.
So there's more excursion here.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So you want this part of the damper to touch first.
Oh.
Well, I make them even.
Or make them even. Even is fine. All right. All right. But touching here first, I think, is wrong. Let's agree that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
well, when it goes on, it's never going to
That
touch
just
the
goes
bottom.
towards the centre of the strings.
And now I can see if my next damper is going to be in line with that, when this lifts, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to have bags of room here. So now,
The hammer still hit the string without getting in the way.
Because you haven't lifted it up, have you? You've
Yeah,
only put
raised
it
the
below.
line.
I've done something wrong here because the hammer's now come off the rest rail. But it's
Oh, yeah, but no, I'm just wanting to see if the
Oh,
hammer
yeah. No,
clears the damper.
this damper is too high for this hammer. I know that.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what I would have to do is take my dampers. All right. Cut this felt off and move this damper block up the damper.
I would actually probably take the barrel down a bit on the wire. You've got plenty of wire there.
Oh, okay.
Wouldn't you do that as an easier option?
If I'm using already bent wires and I'm trying to improve them, all right. If I slide, because they're on an angle, if I slide the damper down,
Yes.
then I've got to move the head
You've
over
got to-
a long way.
Yeah.
That's a surprising long way.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. If I started with completely new wires, yes, I would do that. Yes, you
Yeah.
can do
I
it.
suppose taking the dampers off, cutting felt off and changing the position of the mounting.
Doesn't take terribly long, but
No,
yeah,
which is
you're right.
nice. Yeah, yeah.
you're right. Probably I would do that actually.
Keep the
And
full length
then,
damper just.
all right, this damper. All right, so let's see where that.
I don't know how
takes us.
much you'd have to move that wire. If you only have to go down like 1.5, 2 millimetres.
That's a lot. All right. You can't see it.
Yeah, I
Maybe
can
you can see it now,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's really cranked it sideways.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So now I have to rebend down below. Actually, and I'm bending it further towards its neighbour. And as I've done that, the damper has twisted,
Yeah.
alright? So I've got to
You got to
re-crank this,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know there's a lot of work in messing around with that sort of thing. Yeah.
Anyway, but it's worth being, at this point, it's worth being super fussy with damper number 1. Alright? Now we go to damper number 65, alright? And we put on, and whoever designed this action asked, because this damper button here, that screw, is immediately behind this frame member.
I think the piano maker would have just moved it over one hole. Those mini pianos have got a lot of compromise.
Yeah, sometimes you go to adjust the damper and you play the note and you put your tool in through the hammers to adjust it, and it's actually you're about 4 dampers away from it. You adjust something you think is right, and it's one up here.
Most many pianos are emotionally compromising for me.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You walk into a room to see the Eve stuff, mini with the hammer line going like that. You go,
Why don't you just move the damper and the hammer down one day?
No strings attached.
Oh, dear.
Okay, so here's my appropriate damper here. Okay. Yeah, this is really tricky because the back end of this is going to bump into that.
It's Steinway design.
Yeah. And now I want to bend this damper button here so that this damper number 65 here, lifts off the string. I bend this wire so that this damper here comes off the string at exactly the same time as this does. It's coming, this is lifting early. So to and this is actually how, it's one of those annoying things that you do, but it actually how I do it when this damper then commonly drops into the bottom of the piano and you pick it up and so on.
I remember when you trained me, you would sometimes use double-sided tape for this.
Yeah, sure.
But at the moment it's just dispensing parts everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, bloody screen.
Alright, so now those two dampers are lifting off the strings at exactly the same time. That one and that one. This one here, I'd need to have gone through all my checks to see that it comes off the damper, off the string nicely. Alright. And now I'm going to go through the whole action and put in my samples. Put in my samples all the way through the piano.
What's too big? Can you go too big?
Well, you can't.
Like, what was like? How did you just say, "Oh, I'm going to put those bigger ones on"? Is that just because that's what's there, or would you go right? I'm starting off with these tiny little wee ones, and you just work out what you're going to put on?
When I normally pianos like this, I normally find don't damp well. So I'm, if I can get more,
bigger is better, or just
bigger is better.
yeah.
As big as you can until it hits something.
Yeah.
Even, excuse me, even quite a few of the modern Chinese pianos, they're all wrong in their dampers. They've got tiny heads, and then the spring strength is way over.
Yep.
And when you actually go to play, you get halfway down in the key dip, and you're lifting a small truck. You know?
Yeah. Need your little Archimedes lifter in there.
They don't bring on. They got. There's a heck of a lot of noise in that.
I think that's just because it's quick and cheap to make small little dampers and chuck them in, and
Yeah.
I think it's because you don't want to hear them, so you don't want them to lift off the strings. That's,
Yeah, if you correct the dampers, you basically ruin the consistency of how crap everything else is.
You've got to start from scratch
Yeah.
everywhere else.
That's a good price.
We should have a good project one day.
Oh, the
Take
other
one of
one
those
that's in
pianos that's really bad in all those respects and really make something of it.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
like
they're-
do the dampers really well, really
Replace the
put
hammers.
some good hammers in
Yeah.
and see what you've got at the end.
Just finish it off properly.
They're even good hammers on those pianos, makes massive difference.
Yes.
Okay,
It's just
so
it's doing
once I've established damper, the timing of where damper 65 lifts, alright, then I go through and establish the damper at each break, at each end of the break, and each damper type change. Except I probably wouldn't do any in an upright any of the split wedge that are here. There's normally 4 or 5, and the damper buttons commonly curve up, or sometimes they go straight, sometimes they curve up, depending on the scale design. You're almost better to put them in individually, one by one, right at the end. All right, all those buttons in. So then I'm going to put my next damper in here.
When you do a job like this, David, do you normally, if you're doing a really nice fine damper job, you whip your hammers off?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the hammers are off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hammers are off for access. Except I've
Samples for you.
got
Space.
my sample hammers on for the moment, but I will take them off once I've got all my samples binned.
Yeah.
Because the critical thing with all this damper work is this gap here, right? This gap between the damper spoon and the tail. Right? Without that there, pianos are not going to damp. Right? The quick test for that, of course, is that the damper the damper follow.
Yeah.
Right? So if you come to one of those pianos that's not damping terribly well, just put your finger on the string, and you just want to see that the damper follows the string a little bit all the way through. It doesn't have to be terribly much, but what that means is when the string is vibrating, the damper can actually move beyond point 0 to help the damping. All right, and that can't happen if there's no gap there. And if there's no gap there, you're meeting the spoon straight away. Right?
And that's
So
another-
set these up so that the damper is actually lifting off the spoon here. This one's not yet, but but it's lifting late. That's okay. That's a huge gap. You can bend spoons out, but you can't bend them. A lot of time, if you bend them back, the spoons will tap on the wooden rail here.
Or the screws,
Yeah.
which is really annoying.
Okay.
It's percussive sound you get.
Anyway,
Extra
so now we
instrument.
go through and we set up all the damper buttons, all the damper buttons, and the ones at the end of each section. I put a temporary damper in, just like this. I don't glue it. I use my bending tool to make sure it's bending. It's lifting at exactly the same time as my number 1 sample damper. Everything is run off number 1 sample. Number 1 is lifting now, and this one is actually really close. Okay. Then I whip everything off and I set up all the damper buttons in the piano. Bend them left and right. So that each damper button is looking at exactly each string. Right? And I bend them out of the piano like this with my little front and back benders, so that all lined up, sample to sample, sample to sample. And then, with all the damper buttons, with the whole action here, just with damper buttons on it, then I start looking at the alignment of the damper button here that I said was critical to get it to damp in the right place. All right? Yeah, something's moved here. I'm not quite sure what. So I'm going to go through, and I stand here and move my head fore and aft across those line of damper buttons. All these dampers are then being pushed into line. Damper buttons are being pushed into line with a wedge. All right? And I've got all my damper buttons here, and I've got a straight edge here, and I'm looking to see that all these buttons here are in the same vertical and horizontal alignment, obviously. That the gluing face is correct, has the correct, to achieve the correct damper lift off. Right? And you can get really fussy about this. Right? And using something like that will help you. When that's all done, you take your box of dampers and you glue. You put a nice big blob of glue on the back, and you grab your dampers and you put the coffee on, and you go glue, and you put the damper on the string, and you lift the damper off the string, slide it down, and let the damper button back on, and it's in place. And then you do the next one, damper on, slide it down the string, and make very small adjustments left and right as you go, making sure that the damper is looking exactly at the string. With the treble dampers, the same thing. Even though you would say there's no grooves or in the dampers to follow, put the damper on the string, lift the damper head, push it down the string, release the button, and leave it there to glue. By the time you get to the top, you're done. That's quick, enjoyable work. But it's all in the preparation. Yeah. I mean, those are. I think it's all there on the notes. That's more or less.
Thank you, David.
Have a go.
I completely get the gist.
No, honestly, have a go. If you've not used them. I mean, that happens to be modified one day.
Yeah, so there is actually
they're real get outside and they're black.
These are the longest lasting ones just go to
Put it right down there. There's one on the other one above it. And then move them away. Everyone's least favourite.
Always black. It's just the easiest way to let it tidy.